About 2 weeks ago, I decided to take a drive up to the cabin I had rented for the weekend. The cabin was located in a deep remote forest in the mountains, far from the civilization. I had planned for a quiet, relaxing getaway, but things went horribly wrong from the very beginning of my trip. I left for the cabin late in the afternoon after I get off from my work, hoping to get there before the dark swallowed the forest. I was driving an old sedan that my father gave to me. It was a slow drive, and while it wasn't the most reliable car, I didn't think much of it until I took a turn off the main road and started down a narrow, winding dirt path that led to the cabin. As the night fell, the temperature dropped very quickly. The trees around me becoming dark silhouette against the starlight sky. The forest was dense, with thick undergrowth and tangled branches that seemed to close in on the road. The road itself was rough and uneven, but I pressed on, eager to reach my destination. The weight of the day kept falling on me, pushing me into sleep, but I kept going. After some time, suddenly without any warning, I heard a loud, ominous clunk from under the car. I felt a jolt and the engine sputtered and died. I pulled over to the side of the road, trying to restart the engine, but it was no use. The car was completely broke down in the middle of nowhere with no signals or cell tower. I sat there in the darkness, my breath fogging up the windows. The only light came from the dim beam of my headlight, which barely cut through the dense forest that surrounded me. The silence was suffocating nonetheless, broken only by the crackling of branches and the distant sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. I tried to stay calm. I pulled out my phone to call for roadside assistance, but there was no signal, just like before. I was completely cut off from the outside world, stuck in the road in the middle of the forest. I had no choice but to wait until the morning, hoping that I could get a signal or that someone might pass by that I can ask help for. The darkness around me growing more intense. I turned off the engine and sat in the darkness and shivering in the cold. The silence grew heavier, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I could see nothing outside the car except the shadows and darkness. After a while, I started to hear something, a faint, dragging sound coming from the edge of the forest. It was subtle at first, like the rustling of leaves, moving of branches, but it grew louder as the time went on. My heart began to race, and I looked out through the windshield, but I couldn't see anything. The noises continued around me, accompanied by a low guttural growl that made me jump. It was a sound that seemed to come from the deep within the earth, primal and menacing. I wanted to get out the car and investigate, but the fear kept me freeze in my seat. I sat in my seat and looked around frantically. Then I saw it, emerging from the darkness at the edge of the forest was a figure that defined all the reason. It was tall and large, its limbs long and spindly, bending at unnatural angles. Its skin was sickly grey, stretched tightly over its bones. Its eyes were wide, hollow pits that seemed to drink in the scanlight from the headlight. I looked more close. Its face looked like a skull, a deer skull, the Wendigo. I didn't know at the time, but I would later learn that this was the creature from the legends, an ancient spirit of hunger and winter, a being of unending greed and malevolence. It moved with a disturbing, jerky motion, dragging itself toward in my way that was both unnatural and horrifying at the same time to watch. Its mouth was gaping open, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth that seemed to gleam in the dark. It was as if the creature was starving not just for food, but for something more profound. I could only watch in frozen terror as it approached the car. Its growl grew louder, more intense, a sound that seemed to echo the desolation and the hunger that this creature embodied. My breath quickened, and I tried to keep as still as I possible, hoping that if I didn't move, it wouldn't notice me. Through the windshield, I could see the Wendigo's long, bony fingers reaching out, dragging against the dirt and leaves on the ground. It moved closer, its eyes locked onto the car, as if it were seizing up its prey. The cold wind blew in through the cracked windows, carrying with it the stench of rot and decay. The creature seemed to circle the car, its movements slow and deliberate. It would occasionally stop and stare through the windows with those hollow eyes, as if searching for any signs of any movements inside the car. Every time it did, my heart would skip a beat. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there and wait for it to come closer. I reached into the back seat and grabbed a flashlight I had brought with me, hoping that if I could shine it at the Wendigo, it might scare it away. I turned on the flashlight and shone it through the windshield. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating Wendigo's gaunt face. The creature flinched at the light, recoiling slightly, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it let out a shriek that pierced the night, a sound of pure, unrelenting hunger. I knew that I had to act fast. I grabbed my keys and made for the door, planning to run into the forest and trying to find some shelter or a way out. But as soon as I opened the door, the cold air hit me hard as a hammer, and I saw the Wendigo standing right in front of me. Its long claw reached out. I slammed the door shut and locked it, but the creature was relentless. It started scraping at the windows, its claws making a horrible screeching sound against the glass of the car. I could see its face pressed against the window, its hollow eyes staring right at me. Panic surged through me, and I began to shout for help, though I know no one could hear me. I grabbed the flashlight and shone it at the Wendigo, but it only seemed to make it more agitated. The creature let out another chilling scream, a sound that seemed to shake the very trees around us. I had no choice but to hide in the car. I crawled into the back seat, trying to make myself as small as possible. I could hear the Wendigo moving around my car, dragging its claw along the sides, making the metal groan and creak. I closed my eyes and lay low as close as possible. Time seemed to stretch on forever. I don't know how long I was huddled there, but eventually the sounds outside began to fade. The Wendigo's growls grew more distant, and the scraping noises became less frequent. When the sounds finally stopped, I waited in the darkness for what felt like an eternity before I dared to look out. The creature was gone, leaving only its tracks in the snow and the mark of its claw on my car. I waited until the first light before I ventured outside. The forest was still and silent, the snow covered ground eerily precise. I could see the Wendigo's tracks leading back into the depth of the forest, but I had no intention of following them. I managed to call for a tow truck once I was back on the road, and I got out of there as fast as I could. After waiting in the clearing, a tow truck arrived shortly after my call. They drive me into the nearest town, where I able to fix my car, and I drove straight back to my home. I have been trying to put the experience behind me. I still have nightmares about that night and the hollow eyes of that creature with the skull face still haunting me. The forest loomed large and ancient, a sprawling expanse of pines and shadows that whispered secrets older than the time. It was here, in the heart of winter, that Sam had chosen to hike, seeking solitude from the chaotic life he had left behind in the city. His friends had warned him against venturing into deep woods alone, especially at this time of the year. But he brushed off their concerns. He needed clarity, a moment to breathe away from the buzz of civilization. As he ventured through the snow, each step muffled and cold, Sam found himself enveloped by an eerie silence. The trees towered over him like a watchful sentinels, their branches heavy with frost. It was beautiful, yet there was an unsettling quality to the stillness, a feeling that something was watching him from the depth of the forest. He shook off the sensation and continued on, determined to reach the clearing he had heard so much about. Hours passed, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows that danced eerily across the snow. Sam finally reached the clearing, a breathtaking sighting that momentarily stole his breath. The vast expanse of white was dotted with patches of frozen grass, and in the center stood a solitary oak tree, old and twisted, its branches reaching out like skeletal figures. He set up his camp near the tree, a fire crackling to life as he began to warm his hands. As the sun sank beneath the horizon, the forest transformed, the familiar sound of the day replaced by the haunting calls of the night. The wind howled through the trees, and the firelight flickered, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to move of their own. It wasn't long before he noticed that the first sign that he was not alone in the forest. A rustling came from the underbrush, low and persistent. At first, he attributed it to a deer or something, but as the noise continued, an unsettling feeling began to creep over him. He grabbed his flashlight from his bag and directed the beam toward the sound, but the beam fell upon nothing but the dense thicket of the trees. "Hello," he called out, his voice swallowed by the cold air, but there was no response. The rustling stopped eventually, but the silence that followed felt heavier than ever before, charged with something he couldn't quite identify. Dismissing it as paranoia, Sam turned back to his fire, stoking the flames in an attempt to reassure himself. The night deepened and the temperature plummeted. The fire crackled warmly, but Sam's thoughts drifted to his friends and the stories they shared about the forest. The whispers of a Wendigo, an ancient spirit cursed to wander the woods in search of its next victim. They said it was once a man, a cannibal, doomed to roam eternally, always searching for more than just flesh. He shook his head, trying to push the thoughts aside, but a chill settled in his bones that even the fire couldn't dispel. As he settled into his sleeping bag, he forced himself to ignore the creeping fear. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by the sound of the wind and the occasional snap of branches in the distance. Around midnight, he was jolted awake by a noise, a soft, almost pleading sound, like someone calling for help. His heart raced as he sat up, scanning the darkness around him. "Hello," he called out again, more cautiously this time. The sound came again, a low moan that echoed through the trees, and it kept continuing. Compelled by a mix of curiosity and dread, he grabbed his flashlight and stepped cautiously out of his sleeping bag from the tent. The fire had died down, casting a faint glow, but the surrounding washed over by the darkness. He shined the light into the trees, through the darkness of the forest. "Is someone there?" he shouted, hoping against that it was just an animal in distress or something. And then the moan came again, more desperate this time, and he felt a curiosity to investigate what was making the sound. Against his better judgment, he ventured farther into the woods, the beam of his flashlight flickering as he moved deeper into the forest. The snow crunched behind his boots, and the air was heavy with the scent of pine and something else. As he moved forward, the calls transformed, now sounding like whispers. "Help me, please." The voice was hauntingly human, chilling in its despair. He felt a cold sweat trickling down his spine, yet he pressed on, driven by a need to understand what was going on. "Where are you?" he shouted into the void, the echo of his own voice mocking him. The whispers grew louder, swirling around, enveloping him in a cocoon of dread. "This way," it beckoned, a sighing song leading him deeper into the unknown darkness. Then he saw it, a figure just beyond reach of his flashlight beam. It stood between the trees, partially obscured by the shadows, its shape unnaturally elongated, Panic gripped him as he realized the figure was not human. Its skin was stretched over his sharp bones, glistening in the dim light. Its eyes, like hollow pits, stared back at him, hungry and empty. And it had antlers on its head. It was tall. The whispers intensified, swirling in a chaotic symphony of voices that echoed his name, each calling out in desperation, "Sam, join us." The words sent a shock of terror through him. He stumbled backward, heart pounding, but the Wendigo took a step forward, its movements fluid and predatory. In that moment, he remembered the stories. The Wendigo was not just a creature, it was embodiment of the insatiable hunger, forever seeking to fulfill the void it could never satisfy. It fed not just on flesh, but on fear, despair, and the soul of those who wandered too close. He turned and ran, adrenaline surging through his veins. The branches whipped against him as he darted through the tree line, the echoes of laughter and crying pursuing him. The creature followed, its presence a dark shadow that loomed behind him, relentless and merciless. His mind raced as he stumbled through the underbrush. He needed to get back to his camp, back to the light, and back to the safety. The remaining fire would protect him. He had to believe that. Each step felt heavier, as if the very forest sought to hold him back. Finally, he burst into the clearing, gasping for breath. The fire was nothing but dying embers. But he fumbled for the matches in his pocket, desperate to reignite the flame. Behind him, the Wendigo's whispers grew louder, more menacing, a cacophony that sent chills down his spine. He struck a match, the tiny flame flickering to life as he held it to the fire pitch. With a whoosh, a fire sprang back to the life, crackling and hissing as the flames danced upwards. The heat washed over him, pushing back to the encroaching darkness. The whispers faded, replaced by the crackling of the fire, but he knew it wouldn't be long before the creature returned. As the fire blazed, he grabbed a heavy branch and positioned himself near the flame. Heart pounding, hours passed, each minute feeling like an eternity. The cold seeped into his bone, but he dared not let his gaze wander from the shadows, knowing that Wendigo was lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. At the dawn, the forest took a new life, but the fear remained. The fire burned low, and the oppressive silence returned. Sam's mind raced as he thought of the trail back to his car, a grueling trek through the haunted woods. He had to leave before the night fell again. With a shaky breath, he extinguished the fire and gathered his things, determination coursing him through. The sun rose higher, illuminating the path ahead him. He retraced his steps, the whispers still echoing in his mind, a haunting reminder of the terror he had faced. But as he reached the edge of the clearing, a new sound caught in his attention, a soft, eerie laughter that floating on the breeze. He turned, and there, standing just beyond the tree line, was the Wendigo. Its hollowed eyes glittered in the light, a grotesque smile stretching across his sculpted face. "Sam, you can't escape." He stumbled back, fear overwhelming him as he turned to run, his heart racing faster than ever. The laughter followed him, echoing through the trees, mingling with the wind He sprinted, his lungs burning, snow flying beneath his feet. The trail seemed endless, the forest twisting and turning, branches clawing at him as if trying to pull him back to the darkness. He could feel its presence closing in, the whispers growing louder, a symphony of hunger and despair. Finally, he brushed through the trees and stumbled into the clearing. He fumbled for his key, hands shaking, and threw himself inside, slamming the door shut behind him. The engine roared to the light, and he peeled away, leaving the haunting forest behind him. As he drove, the laughter faded, but the memories of the Wendigo lingered, echoing in his mind. He knew he had escaped for now, but he could feel the hunger still, a whisper at back of his thoughts. The Wendigo was still waiting in the forest. Hey everyone, I just had the craziest experience and I need to share it with you all. So, I was exploring behind my house in the woods that I just bought it few months ago. But I was just moved in recently. I was being in the moment, just enjoying the fresh air and the nature vibes when something really strange happened. It was a sunny afternoon and I decided to take a walk through the nearby woods. The woods looked beautiful with sunlight filtering through the leaves, creating a pattern on the ground. As I strolled deeper, the sound of bird chirping and leaves rustling filled the air, make it all so peaceful and symphony to the ears. But then I noticed something odd. There was this weird feeling in the air, like I was being watched. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing with me. But as I kept walking, the feeling grew more stronger, and I started to get a bit more nervous. That's when I saw it, a figure standing among the trees. It was tall, slender, almost like a shadow blending into the mark of the tree. My heart started racing as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. I called out, thinking maybe it was another person lost in the woods, just like me. But no response. I squinted, trying to get a better look, but the figure seeming to move with the shadows, make it hard to see clearly. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized this wasn't just another person. There was something eerie about it, something that didn't quite fit. I decided to casually approach, my footstep crunching on the dry leaves. With each step, my heart pounded louder in my ears. The figure didn't move, didn't react to my presence at all. It just stood there, watching me with what felt like unseen eyes. As I got closer, I could see it more clearly. It had a strange shape, almost like a person, but not quite. Its features were weird, not fitting at all, as if it was made of mist and shadows. I could feel a strange energy emanating from it, like static in the air before a thunderstorm. I mustered up all my courage and finally spoke again, asking if it needed any help or if it was lost. This time there was a faint whisper in the wind, almost like a response, but not quite. And I couldn't make out any words, whatever it said. Suddenly, without warning, The figure began to fade. It dissolved into the thin air like smoke, leaving behind an eerie silence in the woods. I stood there, completely baffled and a little scared, trying to comprehend what just happened right before my eyes. I hurried back home. My mind was racing with questions. What was the thing? Was it some kind of spirit? Or just a trick of the light? I couldn't shake the feeling that I had encountered something beyond my understanding, something that belonged to a realm I couldn't see. Now, as I sit here writing this, I can't help but wonder if anyone else has experienced something similar in the woods like this. It's a strange feeling knowing that there might be mysteries lurking just beyond our sight, waiting to be discovered. So, if you ever find yourself wandering in the woods behind your house or any other places, keep your senses sharp and your mind open. You may never know what you might encounter out there. It could be something straight out of a horror story, like my own eerie encounter with the unknown. This happened few years ago, and till this day, it's still baffled with my head. So, I was taking a walk in the really dense, thick forest near my town few years back when I was in my hometown. It was already getting late, and the sun was setting, casting an eerie shadow all around the woods. As I walked deeper into the forest, I started to feel this strange sensation, like someone or something was watching me. I tried to shake it off, thinking it was just imagination or something like that. But then I heard a rustling noise coming from behind a cluster of trees. I froze in my tracks, heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't see anyone or anything there. But then the feeling of being watched grew more stronger and stronger. So I called out, "Hello, is anyone there?" But no response. Just the sound of leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. Then I decided to keep walking, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But then, suddenly, I saw it, a figure standing among the trees, barely visible in the fading light. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to make out any details. The figure was tall, cloaked in the shadows, making it hard to see more clearly. My heart raced as I debated whether to approach it or run away. Before I could decide, the figure spoke in a voice that I never heard before and after. "Lost, are we?" it said, the words echoing softly through the forest. I couldn't see its face, but the voice was calm, yet strangely unsettling. I managed to stammer out, I'm I'm just taking a walk. I didn't mean it to intrude." There was a long pause, and then the figure stepped forward into a patch of moonlight. What I saw made my blood run cold. Its face was obscured by a hood, but its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. They seemed to be pierced right through me, as if searching for something. "You are brave to wander here alone," the figure said quietly. "Few venture into these woods at this time." Feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. "Who are you? What are you doing out here?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling slightly. The figure smiled faintly, though it didn't reach its eyes. But I am a wanderer, it replied cryptically. I seek solitude and silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this encounter than met the eye. Something about the figure's presence felt ancient and otherworldly. Before I could gather my thoughts, the figure turned and started to walk away. Wait, I called out, suddenly desperate for answers. What do you mean by solitude and silence? What are you? The figure stopped and looked back at me, its expressions unreadable. I had many names throughout the time, but names matter little in the grand scheme of things. It said, now more aggressively. With that statement, the figure disappeared into the shadows, leaving me standing alone in the forest. I stood there for a very long time, trying to make sense of what just happened right in front of my eye. I was a no believer of paranormal creatures, entities, things like that. But this encounter, this was a different one that really shook me to my core. Eventually, I made my way back home, my mind racing with questions. Who was that mysterious figure? What did it want? Why did it appear to me in the middle of the forest? And why it disappeared just like that? I may never know the answer to these questions, but one thing for sure, that encounter will stay with me for a long time. It's a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected moments can happen when you least expect them.
I don't know if I should be sharing this, but after everything I have been through, I feel like I need to get it off my chest. It's been few years since it happened, and I still can shake the images and the sounds, or the overwhelming feeling of dread that I have every time I think about it. I'm a wildlife photographer, and it's been my dream for as long as I can remember to capture the beauty of the nature. I have hiked through forests, trekked mountains, and spent night in the wild, all for the love of photography. But what happened in the remote woods was something I could never have prepared for. I still don't know if anyone will believe me, but I swear on my life it was real. It was late autumn when I decided to head into the woods for a few days of camping and shooting. I have been to this part of the forest before, a thick dense stretch of land that few people ever visit. The locals talk about the woods, but they don't often venture in. There is a kind of eerie reputation about it, something that feels off. But as a photographer, I was used to being alone in the wilderness for a long period of time. When I get there, I pitched my tent in a small clearing by a stream, my camera gear unpacked and ready for the next day's shooting. The air was crisp, and the forest had that haunting quiet it always had. The kind where every rustle of leaf seems louder than it should be. I remember thinking how serene it was, almost like the forest itself was holding its breath. I set up my camera, taking shot of the early sunset, the golden light streaming through the trees, and the subtle details of the forest floor. and it was amazing. There's something peaceful about it, being alone with your thoughts and your lens. You know what I'm talking about. As the night fell, I made a fire and sat by it for a while, letting the crackling warmth chase away the chills. The woods around me were dark, the only sound the occasional snapping of a twig underfoot or the rustling of leaves when an animal walking by. But then, around 10 p.m., I heard something strange. At first, it was just a whisper, like a faint voice carried on the wind, but there was no one around. I paused, trying to make sense of it. I cackled it up to the wind, or maybe an animal in the distance searching for its prey. But then the whispers became more clearer. They were soft, unillegible, but distinctly human, as if someone, no, something was calling out from the trees. I have spent enough time in the wilderness to know the difference between an animal sound and something else. So my instincts told me to stay alert. But honestly, I was more curious than scared at the time. So I grabbed my flashlight and stood up, scanning the trees around me. The beam of my flashlight flickered over branches, but the voices stopped just suddenly as they started. After looking for some time, I told myself I was being paranoid, a common thing for people out in the woods alone. But then I heard it again, closer this time, a low growl. It was an animal like, but not quite there, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I know wildlife, and I have heard a lot of animals over the years. But this was something different, something that didn't belong in the natural. I should have packed up and left right away, but I didn't. I stayed, wanting to prove myself that it was just my imagination running wild. That was the mistake I made. The following hours felt like a blur. I tried to sleep, but strange noises continued, growing louder and more unsettling each time passing by. Something wasn't right about this place. I can't even describe it properly. It wasn't just the sound, it was the feeling. The air was thick, heavy, and suffocating, like the forest itself was alive and watching me. Every twig snap sounded like footsteps. Every hustle and rustle of the leaves felt like a threat. The forest seemed to alive, too aware of my presence. Around 2 a.m., I finally couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight again and threw on my jacket and decided to go check out the surrounding area, hoping to shake off the anxiety. I walked a bit further from my camp, following the creek, trying to steady my breath, but that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, just a shadow moving between the trees. But as I looked closer, my heart dropped. There, standing motionless in the moonlight, was something I will never forget. It was tall, easily 7 or 8 feet, and its body was unnaturally thin. Its limb twisted at odd angles, like a person in the wrong skin, but it wasn't humans. And I looked on its head. It had antlers, two big antlers growing on its skull. No way. Its skin was stretched tight over the bones, pale and almost translucent, as it had been bleached by the moonlight itself. Its face was long, gaunt and featureless, except for the eye, those cold, empty, hollow eyes. They glowed faintly in the dark, like a predator's gaze. I froze in place. My heart pounded in my chest like they did never before. The only sound in my ears. I didn't move, didn't even breathe, afraid that any motion would draw its attention. It was standing there, and I was sure it didn't see me at the time, so I didn't want to grab its attention by doing something. I stand there for minutes, watching its movements, and try not to make any noise. And then, in a slow, deliberate motion, the thing turned its head towards me. I didn't know how to explain the feeling that washed over me. It was pure terror, instinctual fear. The hairs on back of my neck stood up. My body screamed at me to run, get the hell out from there. But my legs were frozen, as if rooted to the ground. It was then I heard the voice again, but this time it wasn't coming from the woods. It was coming from the figure. Come closer, it whispered, the voice chilling and unnatural. It sounded like it was coming from a very thin air, wrapping itself around me, as if it was inside my head. The moment that voice hit my ear, a primal fear took over. I couldn't move, couldn't even think. It was as if my very existence was in its control. I could feel the weight of its gaze, and in that instant, I knew I had to run, or I wouldn't survive the night. I turned and bolted back. I ran without looking back, not caring about the camera and my gear, or anything else. All that mattered was getting out of that place. The woods, once so serene, now felt alive with danger, waiting to swallow me. I could hear something behind me, a presence, moving through the trees, its breath ragged, unnerving. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, and I stumbled, panic blinding me. I didn't know how long I ran, but it felt like hours. But it was probably only minutes. Finally, I reached my tent. My legs burned, but I dove inside my camp and zipped it up. I could still hear the noises outside, soft, creeping like something was just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I stared inside the tent, shaking, for what felt like eternity. The growls, the whispers, and the strange feeling of being watched never stopped. The worst part? If I was just imagining it all, but I knew in my gut that what I had seen and what had been followed me was real. I left the forest the next morning at first light came through the woods, not bothering to pack up my equipment. It was like the woods themselves wanted me to go from there. After all these years, whenever I close my eyes, I can still see those hollow eyes staring at me, still hearing that voice calling me from the trees. I don't know if I will ever go back to this place. I got my camera equipment few weeks after that happened. The forest guards contacted me. They were collected my equipments and I went there to the office to take my thing from them. There are stories older than I am about a creature that lurks in the dark places of the woods. They called it the Wendigo, an ancient spirit, a monster that roams the forest, always hungry, always searching for its next victim. And now I know it's real too. If you ever find yourself in the woods, any woods, alone, and you feel that something was off and you are being watched, trust your instincts, leave, and don't look back. Please I don't wish the experience on anyone.
Hope you guys like this video. If you did, please consider subscribing to this channel. Enable the bell icon so you don't miss new uploads. And also check out other videos in this channel too. Like them and share them. And if you have any suggestions or any improvements I need to make in this channel, please post them in the comment section. Till next time, this is Malayali Wendigo. Bye.